So I want you to just imagine for a second that you are 18 years old. It's your very first, like, real summer job between high school and college. And you are standing inside the Naknek cannery up in Bristol Bay, Alaska.
Oh, wow. Yeah, quite the introduction to the workforce.
Right. And it's the 4th of July. So you're surrounded by this just deafening, humming machinery. It is freezing cold. The floor is completely wet. And you're staring down this conveyor belt where wild sockeye salmon are just, I mean, they're pouring in by the tens of thousands.
It's a literal avalanche of fish at that point in the season.
An avalanche, exactly. Yeah. And so you look up from the canning line, just glance out the window, and leaning, like, totally casually against the chain-link fence outside is a 900-pound grizzly bear.
Just hanging out.
Just hanging out,
Oh.
watching you frantically pack cans.
I mean, it really is the ultimate collision, right, of raw apex nature and heavy industrialized human production.
Yeah.
Because Bristol Bay in early July, it isn't just a fishery. It's a biological phenomenon operating at a scale that's honestly hard to fathom. And the 4th of July, that is traditionally the absolute peak of the sockeye run, where millions of these animals all arrive at the exact same geographic bottleneck at the exact same time.
And I know this specific scene so intimately because my son actually lived it.
No kidding.
He spent a summer working that exact cannery line. And, the detail about the bears at the fence, that never left me because they smell this unbelievable concentration of biomass and they just wander out of the wilderness to spectate.
I mean, who wouldn't? It's the best restaurant in town.
Right. But what really anchors our entire deep dive today, the mission of this whole conversation we're having, is realizing that the teenager on the processing line and the bear at the fence, they are both entirely dependent on a single invisible number.
A number that literally dictates everything.
Everything.
I mean, the entire ecosystem, the local economy, the global supply chain of wild salmon, and, the fate of those processing jobs, they all hang on this one specific metric called escapement.
Escapement. Which, I'll be honest, when I first heard that term, my mind went straight to, like, a Steve McQueen movie.
A prison break.
Right. It sounds like a prison break. But in a biological sense, it is arguably the most important data point in fisheries science. Because escapement is literally the count of salmon that are allowed to slip past the commercial fishing nets in the saltwater bays,
right,
escape the harvest, and swim freely up their natal rivers to spawn.
It's the seed corn. If you think about the life cycle of a sockeye salmon, it's a localized miracle, honestly, because these fish hatch in these really specific freshwater gravel beds, right?
Yeah.
Then they swim out to the Pacific Ocean. They spend a few years out there just growing, accumulating all these marine nutrients. Getting huge. And then they turn around. And using this crazy combination of magnetic field navigation and this, incredibly sensitive olfactory memory.
Oh, wait. Olfactory, like they smell it?
Yes.
Yeah.
They track their way back to the exact stream, sometimes the exact bend in the river where they were born.
They literally smell their way home. That is wild.
They do. And the commercial fleet, they know this. So they position themselves strategically in the saltwater approaches right before the salmon hit those river mouths.
Forming a gauntlet.
Exactly. A gauntlet. And the fish that survive that gauntlet, the ones that escape the gear, they are the sole guarantee that this multi-million-dollar cycle will happen again in 4 or 5 years.
So, okay, my immediate, completely unscientific assumption would be if these escaping fish are the guarantee for the future, you should want as many of them as possible, right?
That's what most people think.
Like, shut down the nets, let the rivers run entirely red with salmon, and you'll just have this massive bounty in the future. So more spawning fish has to equal more baby fish.
It's the most intuitive assumption to make, but biologically, it is a recipe for complete disaster.
Really?
Yeah. The relationship between the number of spawning adults and the number of surviving offspring, it's not just a straight line going upward forever. It operates on a really strict Goldilocks principle.
The Goldilocks principle. So not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. You need exactly the right amount. If too few fish escape, you obviously don't have enough eggs and the future run collapses. But this is the crazy part. If too many fish escape, you trigger this biological catastrophe known as overescapement.
Overescapement. Okay, so what actually happens in the water if you let, say, I don't know, 10 million fish into a river that's only meant to hold 5 million.
Well, we actually have stark historical data on this, specifically looking at events on the Naknek River. When an overwhelming number of sockeye crowd into the spawning grounds, they physically destroy their own future.
How?
Okay, picture this. A female sockeye finds a spot of gravel. She uses her really powerful tail to dig a depression.
Which is called a red, right?
Yes, a red, R-E-D-D. She deposits her eggs, and she guards them as they're fertilized. Now, if the river is overcrowded, a second wave of females arrive, like a few days later.
Oh, no. And there's no space.
There's no empty gravel left. So, completely driven by instinct, they aggressively dig their reds in the exact same spots.
So they're essentially bulldozing the first generation of eggs right out of the gravel.
Yes. The biological term for it is red superimposition.
Wow.
Yeah. The previously laid eggs get kicked up into the water column, they drift downstream, and they're instantly eaten by trout or birds, or they just, die from exposure.
That is brutal. So the fish are actively sabotaging each other's reproductive success.
Completely. But that is only the physical destruction. The chemical destruction is actually even worse.
Chemical destruction from just having too many fish in the water.
Think about what happens after salmon spawn.
They die.
They die. It is the end of their life cycle. So their bodies begin to decay in the river, which normally provides vital nutrients to the ecosystem.
Right, like fertilizer.
Exactly. But if you have an artificially massive concentration of decaying biomass, the bacteria feeding on those carcasses, their population just explodes.
Bacteria consume oxygen.
Exactly. It creates a massive biochemical oxygen demand. The bacteria literally suck the dissolved oxygen right out of the water.
So the water becomes, what's the word? Hypoxic.
Hypoxic, yes. Suddenly, the pristine, highly oxygenated river water that the newly fertilized eggs desperately need to survive, it's gone. The eggs suffocate in the gravel.
That is insane.
It gets worse. On top of that, the dense crowding in the holding pools before they even spawn, it massively accelerates the transmission of fungal infections and diseases. On that Naknek River example, biologists documented massive die-offs where crowded fish just succumbed to disease and lack of oxygen before they ever dropped a single egg.
So letting too many fish pass the nets isn't like an act of conservation at all. It's a literal death sentence for the river.
It is a biological tragedy caused entirely by unchecked abundance.
Which means someone has to figure out the exact mathematical capacity of these rivers.
Right, and that is the absolute foundation of modern fisheries management. The biologists, they establish a hard target. It's called the biological escapement goal, or the BEG.
The BEG. Okay. I actually found that the easiest way to wrap my head around the BEG is to think of a nightclub's maximum capacity.
Yeah.
Like determined by the fire marshal.
Oh, I like that. Let's hear it.
So if you own a club,
Right.
you want people coming through the door so you can sell tickets and drinks. That's your commercial harvest.
Right, that's the money.
But the fire marshal comes in and says, look, based on the square footage, the exits, the ventilation, this room can only safely hold a window of, say, 400 to 500 people at a time.
It's a perfect parallel to biological carrying capacity.
Yeah, because if you only let in 100 people, the club feels dead. The energy is totally gone. You can't pay your staff. That is under escapement. The ecosystem is starved of nutrients and offspring.
Exactly.
But if you try to cram 1,500 people into that 500-person room, people are getting trampled, the air conditioning completely fails, and it's a disaster. That's over escapement.
Right, the oxygen depletes, literally.
Yes. So the biological escapement goal, that BEG, is that agonizingly tight sweet spot between 400 and 500 people where the business thrives, the people are safe, and you can, open the doors again tomorrow.
That is spot on. And in fisheries science, the term for keeping the doors open and the profits flowing year after year is maximum sustained yield, or MSY.
MSY.
MSY is the holy grail. It is this highly complex mathematical curve that calculates the exact peak of efficiency, like harvesting the absolute maximum number of fish to feed humans and drive the economy, while ensuring that the exact number of fish needed to completely replace the population make it to the gravel.
But, calculating that curve, that has to require knowing exactly how many fish spawned in a given year, and then exactly how many offspring returned from that specific spawning event 4 years later. You'd need, decades of immaculate data to draw that curve?
You do. It's incredibly data intensive.
So what happens if a river system hasn't been studied that intensely? You can't just guess the fire code.
No, you definitely can't guess. But you can rely on historical observation. So when decades of that precise parent-to-offspring data just aren't available to build a rigid BEG, the state uses a secondary metric. It's called a sustainable escapement goal, or SEG.
SEG. Okay. So how is that different?
And SEG essentially looks backward.
Yeah.
The biologists look at the historical records and say, okay, we don't have the math to pinpoint the exact maximum yield, but we know for a fact that whenever escapement landed between, say, 700,000 and 1.2 million fish, the river consistently produced really healthy returns in the subsequent years.
Oh, I see. So it's an observational safe zone.
Precisely. It's a safe zone based on what's worked before.
And the scale of these safe zones in Bristol Bay is just, it's difficult to comprehend. We aren't talking about counting a few dozen elk in a valley here.
Right at all.
Like the Naknek River, which is right where my son was working, has an escapement goal of 800,000 to 2 million fish. And the Kripchak River, which is this massive sprawling system, has a target window of 2 million to 10 million fish.
2 million to 10 million. Just think about that range. If you fall below 2 million, you risk starvation of the future run. If you go above 10 million, you trigger that red superimposition and the oxygen depletion we just talked about.
But okay, knowing the target is honestly the easy part. A biological goal is just a number printed on a whiteboard in an office somewhere. Enforcing that target in the wild seems fundamentally impossible to me.
It does sound like a logistical nightmare.
Because you're dealing with tens of millions of wild animals swimming underwater, mixing together in this chaotic saltwater bay, driven by tides, weather, and instinct. You can't just set a signal quota in January and expect nature to, comply.
You absolutely cannot. Although, interestingly, in many fisheries around the world, managers do exactly that.
Really?
Yeah, they run a computer model in the winter, decide the ocean can support a harvest of, say, 10 million fish, and give the fleet a quota. And when the fleet catches 10 million, they just go home.
But Bristol Bay isn't managed like that.
No. Because the survival of the rivers depends on precise numbers hitting the gravel. The entire fishery is managed on the fly. It's called in-season management.
In-season management. So that means the throttle is constantly being feathered based on real-time data.
Exactly. The bay is carved up into these commercial fishing districts that correspond to the major river systems feeding into them. And the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, ADF&G, they have biologists stationed in regional offices, primarily in King Salmon and Dillingham.
Okay.
These managers, they hold ultimate authority. They do not set a season-long schedule. Instead, they dynamically open and close individual districts day by day, sometimes literally hour by hour, based entirely on the daily escapement counts.
So the communication loop has to be just totally airtight, because up to 4 times a day, the counting stations that are situated miles up these rivers, they radio their cumulative tallies back to Dillingham.
Yeah.
And the managers are sitting there staring at a spreadsheet, looking at, say, the Kripchak River minimum of 2 million. And if a Kripchak count is currently at like 500,000 and the daily numbers are trickling in way too slowly to hit the curve, they have to pull the emergency brake.
They get right on the VHF marine radio, broadcasting to the entire commercial fleet, and they order an immediate closure of the Naknek Fijak district.
Boom, just like that.
Just like that. Hundreds of boats must immediately pull their nets out of the water. The whole bay goes quiet, and the managers are intentionally letting this massive wave of fish slip past the idle boats, swim into the fresh water, and push that tower count up toward the 2 million mark.
But the tension there is just unbelievable, because every single day those nets are out of the water. Money is literally burning.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if we look at the 2025 season, the numbers illustrate the razor's edge these managers walk. In 2025, a staggering 56.7 million sockeye flitted into Bristol Bay over the course of just a few weeks.
It is an almost incomprehensible amount of biomass moving through a single geographic bottleneck, 56.7 million.
Right, and out of that 56.7 million, the commercial fleet harvested 41.2 million fish. And roughly 15.5 million fish safely escaped the nets to spawn bay-wide.
Which is an incredible balance.
It is. That balance resulted in every single major river system meeting or exceeding its minimum escapement goal. It was a textbook management success.
Truly.
But the financial weight of that success is just staggering, because the ex-vessel value of that 2025 harvest was $215.3 million.
And it is so crucial to understand what ex-vessel value actually means.
Yeah, explain that.
That isn't the retail value of salmon at a fancy grocery store in New York.
Yeah.
That $215.3 million is the raw direct cash paid to the fishermen right at the dock when they offload their holds into the tender vessels.
Wow.
It is the immediate, localized economic injection that sustains the entire region for the rest of the year.
Which means a single miscalculation on the escapement count has catastrophic financial consequences.
Yes, it does.
Because if the managers act on a count that is falsely low, they might keep a district closed for, let's say, an extra 24 hours. And a single day of closed fishing at the absolute peak of the run, that can deprive the fleet of millions of dollars of catch.
Millions.
It deprives the local tax base. And down the line, it deprives the cannery workers, like my son, of the raw material they need to earn their summer wages. The canning lines just sit totally empty.
And conversely, if the count is falsely high and the managers open the district a day early, the fleet drops their nets and they scoop up the exact fish that were desperately needed to reach the minimum biological goal.
They eat the seed corn.
Exactly. They eat the seed corn, risking the total collapse of a billion-dollar ecosystem in the coming decades.
The grizzly bear's diet, the ecosystem's oxygen levels, the fishermen's mortgages, and the global salmon market, it all hangs entirely on the absolute accuracy of this daily real-time count.
It all comes back to the count.
So logically, if billions of dollars rely on this precise data stream, you would just naturally assume the state of Alaska employs a triumph of modern engineering to collect it.
Right.
You picture military-grade sonar, lasers, satellites, artificial intelligence running these complex recognition algorithms in the water.
It makes sense that you'd think that, but this is where the reality of Bristol Bay entirely subverts our modern expectations.
Yeah, because the high-tech instrument producing this world-altering real-time data is not a supercomputer at all.
No, it's not.
It is a human being standing on an aluminum scaffold holding a mechanical thumb clicker.
It is. It is almost comical when you think about the stakes.
It's wild. The entire economic and biological throttle of the planet's largest sockeye fishery is literally just the person on a ladder.
Yep.
To understand how we arrived at this gorgeously analog system, we have to look back to the early 1950s, because somebody had to realize that physically counting millions of fish by eye was even possible.
Right. And prior to the 1950s, the methods for counting salmon were deeply invasive. The primary tool was something called a weir, W-E-I-R.
A weir.
A weir is essentially a physical fence built entirely across the width of a river, and it forces all the migrating fish to funnel through this tiny narrow gate where an observer can tally them one by one.
But a weir in a major Alaskan river sounds like a complete engineering nightmare. I mean, you have massive currents, floodwaters, floating trees.
Oh, they frequently washed out, completely destroyed.
Right.
But more importantly, from a biological standpoint, weirs cause immense stress. You are taking millions of wild animals driven by this urgent physiological need to swim upstream, and you are trapping them at a bottleneck.
Right, they must just pile up.
They pile up, they panic, they exhaust their very limited energy reserves just fighting the fence.
You are building a biological toll booth on a superhighway. It is completely counterproductive to the goal of a healthy spawning run.
Exactly. It was a terrible system. So in 1951, a fisheries scientist named Charles Walker was working on the Wood River near Lake Naknek, and he was tasked with finding a better way.
Okay.
And he simply stepped back and observed the hydrodynamics of a salmon run. He noticed that sockeye don't actually swim up the deep, fast-moving channel in the center of the river.
Because they aren't trying to fight the heaviest current. They're trying to conserve energy.
Precisely. They take the path of least resistance. Walker realized that the massive schools of sockeye naturally hug the shallow banks, swimming just a few feet from the shore, where the water friction against the riverbed and the banks slows the current down.
Wow. So the fish were voluntarily lining themselves up in the shallows.
Yes. Walker realized you didn't need to build a massive fence across a mile-wide river. You just needed a really good vantage point on the shore. If you elevate an observer just a few feet into the air, looking down into that shallow water, the fish simply swim right past your feet.
That is so elegant.
So in 1953, another scientist, W.F. Thompson, took Walker's observation and ran a formal pilot study to see if this visual estimation technique could be, statistically standardized.
And it was a massive success, obviously, because just 2 years later, in 1955, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game officially adopted the tower counting program.
1955.
Think about the era. Eisenhower is in the White House.
Yeah.
The first commercial microwave ovens are just hitting the market. And ADF&G is sending young biologists into the Alaskan bush to hammer together wooden scaffolds over raging rivers.
It was a total revolution in passive observation. But, while the core concept hasn't changed since 1955, the physical architecture of the counting stations certainly evolved, driven entirely by the harsh logistics of the Alaskan wilderness.
Yeah, let's talk about the physical build. Because you can't just nail a few 2x4s to a pine tree and call it a day. You need a stable platform that can survive a season of brutal weather. Why did they move away from those original wooden scaffolds?
Well, wood is incredibly heavy. It rots in the constant rain, and it is an absolute nightmare to transport. Keep in mind, these counting sites are not accessible by road.
Right.
The equipment has to be flown in via bush planes or hauled miles upriver on small skiffs. So the modern counting tower is constructed from lightweight, modular aluminum scaffolding.
The exact same stuff you see painters using on the side of a house.
Exactly. It can be broken down, shipped in pieces, easily assembled by a crew of 3, and then dismantled at the end of the short season so it isn't completely destroyed by the winter ice.
Makes sense.
And because the fish hug both shores, a crew will erect one tower on the right bank and another tower on the left bank.
So they build them up to, what, 4 stories high?
Usually, yeah. And then they heavily guide them down, meaning they anchor them to the shore with these thick steel cables so they don't just blow over in the 50-mile-per-hour winds that routinely sweep off the Bering Sea.
Okay, so you have your aluminum tower anchored to the bank, you climb the ladder, you look down into the water. But an Alaskan river in July is not a pristine glass-bottomed aquarium. It is rushing, it's dark, it's turbulent. How can an observer standing 20 feet in the air definitively see a dark green and silver fish swimming against a dark, muddy river bottom?
This is where the low-tech, functional brilliance of the system really, really shines. Because they don't just rely on good eyesight, they actually manipulate the visual environment.
How so?
Well, to solve the problem of a dark river bottom, the crews literally install a brightly lit stage on the riverbed. They take large sections of metal grating, paint them bright white or light gray, and lay them directly on the river bottom right beneath the tower's field of view.
Oh, so they create a high contrast background.
Yes. When a dark-bodied sockeye swings over that white grating, the camouflage is completely defeated. The fish pops visually. It becomes this sharp, undeniable silhouette moving across a white canvas.
That solves the river bottom. But you still have to look through the surface of the water, and rushing water reflects the sky, it chops up the light, it distorts everything beneath it.
Right. So to fix the physical turbulence, the crews deploy a tool called a riffle dampener.
Riffle dampener, I love that. It sounds like a piece of equipment from Ghostbusters, but it's incredibly practical, right?
Extremely practical. A riffle is just a patch of choppy, turbulent water on the surface. So a riffle dampener is essentially a floating physical barrier. Sometimes it's just a strategic arrangement of logs or a floating wooden frame that the crew anchors just upstream of their white grating.
Okay.
As the heavy current hits the dampener, it breaks the surface tension and disrupts the chop. The water flowing out from under the dampener is suddenly incredibly smooth, creating this glassy, flat window directly over the counting stage.
It's like ironing out a wrinkled sheet of glass so you can clearly see what's underneath it.
Exactly. And to combat the glaring reflection of the sky off that glassy surface, the counters rely on the physics of light. Sunlight reflecting off water becomes horizontally polarized, which creates that intense, blinding sheen.
Right.
So the counters wear heavily polarized sunglasses, which contain vertical filters that physically block those horizontal light waves. The glare is completely erased, and the observer can look straight through the surface as if the water wasn't even there.
It is brilliant. You smooth the water, you blast out the glare, and you paint the floor white. But that only works when the sun is shining.
Very true.
And the salmon run does not adhere to human business hours. The fish migrate upstream 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How on earth do you count fish in the pitch black of an Alaskan night?
The ADF&G operational manuals outline a solution for this that is almost stubbornly simple.
Oh, yeah.
They don't use infrared. They don't use thermal imaging. They use a standard white automobile headlight powered by a heavy 12-volt car battery.
A literal car headlight bolted to a scaffold.
Yes, bolted right to the scaffold. They aim the headlight directly down through the riffle dampener and onto the white grating. It creates this illuminated lane in the black water.
Wow.
The counter sits in the dark on the tower and just watches as these silver fish swim into the beam of light, flash across the white stage, and disappear back into the night. It requires no complex circuitry, no software updates, and if it breaks, you just wire up a new bulb.
The ingenuity of the physical setup is undeniable. It's cheap, it's modular, it's effective. But the machinery is only half the equation here, because the human labor required to actually operate this system, to sit up there on that aluminum perch around the clock, is incredibly demanding.
Very.
These aren't machines on the towers. They are seasonal technicians, usually in their 20s, working in these remote camps.
It is a physically and psychologically grueling job. The camps usually consist of just small wall tents or rudimentary cabins, and a standard tower site is staffed by a crew of just 3 people.
3 people.
Yeah. Because the river never stops, the counting never stops, which means those 3 individuals must cover a full 24-hour cycle by working rotating 8-hour shifts.
I was reading an account from a technician named Suze Green, who worked the Wood River Tower during the 2021 season. And 2021 was not just a regular year. It was the largest sockeye run ever recorded in the history of Bristol Bay.
Oh, to be on a tower in 2021 meant you were constantly under siege by the sheer volume of the migration.
Right. So Suze Green worked a 6-week season during that peak. And her daily reality was staggering to me. For her 8-hour shift, she had to commute from her remote lakeside camp by piloting a small skiff downriver.
Just to get to work.
Just to get to work. She reaches the Wood River Tower, which she described as being roughly 4 stories tall, wet aluminum scaffolding. And because she is responsible for counting both the left bank and the right bank of the river, her shift consisted of climbing up that 4-story ladder, sitting in the elements, climbing back down, crossing the river, and climbing a second 4-story ladder.
Over and over.
She estimated she made that climb at least 16 times per shift.
16 climbs up a wet metal ladder every single day for 6 straight weeks while your sleep schedule is constantly rotating.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on the environmental hostility of the Alaskan bush in July.
The bugs. It is impossible to overstate the bugs.
Oh, the bugs.
People hear mosquitoes and they think of like a backyard barbecue in Ohio. Alaskan mosquitoes operate in dense, suffocating swarms.
They do. They get into your eyes, your ears, your nose. You are wearing heavy head nets, covered in DEET, completely exposed on a platform high above the river. You are sitting completely still, staring intensely at the water, while hundreds of insects actively try to feed on you.
Add to that the driving rain, the biting wind, and the relentless glare of the sun when it finally breaks through the clouds. The physical isolation is profound. You are entirely alone with your thoughts and a clicker.
It really is a test of endurance.
Which is where my brain completely halts. I mean, I admire the grit of these technicians. But we just established that the ex-vessel value of this fishery is over $200 million. An entire regional economy relies on the absolute precision of this number.
Yes.
You cannot expect a sleep-deprived 22-year-old who is being eaten alive by mosquitoes while sitting in the freezing rain at 3 in the morning to maintain the microscopic level of visual focus required to accurately count every single fish passing a tower for 8 hours straight. Human beings are not built for that. The error rate would be catastrophic.
You know, your skepticism is entirely scientifically justified. If you demanded a human to stare uninterrupted at a rushing river for 8 straight hours, the data would be utterly useless.
Right.
The human brain cannot process a continuous, repetitive visual stimulus for that long without breaking down. But the designers of the system knew that. They didn't build the system around the assumption of perfect human focus. They built the entire protocol to mitigate the biological limits of the human brain.
Okay, so how do they hack the human attention span? Because if I tried to do this, I would go cross-eyed in 20 minutes.
And 20 minutes is exactly the psychological threshold.
Really?
Yes. The protocol governing these towers, which is detailed heavily by biologists like Carol Ann Woody from the Wild Salmon Center, dictates that the technicians do not count continuously. They sample the river. It is universally known as the 10-minute method.
The 10-minute method. Walk me through exactly how a single hour of this shift operates.
Okay, so at the top of the hour, the technician climbs the tower on the right bank. They settle into their chair, adjust their polarized glasses, look down at the white grating, and start a timer. For exactly 10 minutes, they devote 100% of their cognitive focus to the water, clicking for every single fish that passes. And when the timer hits 10:00, they stop.
They stop completely.
Yes. They climb down the 40-foot ladder, get into their skiff, or walk across a bridge if one exists, cross the river to the left bank, climb that tower, start the timer, and count the left side for exactly 10 minutes.
Wait, so out of a 60-minute hour, they only have 20 total minutes of hard data. 10 minutes from the right, 10 minutes from the left. How does that become an hourly total?
Through basic extrapolation. They take the 10-minute count from the right bank and simply multiply it by 6 to estimate the total passage for that side for the full hour, and they do the exact same for the left bank.
Multiply by 6. That is elegantly simple math. But the choice of 10 minutes, that isn't just a random number to give them a break from the wind, is it?
No, not at all. It is deeply rooted in cognitive psychology and decades of research into what is called the vigilance decrement.
The vigilance decrement.
Yes. Since World War II, when the military studied radar operators staring at screens, science has known that human beings can only maintain absolute uninterrupted visual vigilance on a repetitive task for about 15 to 20 minutes. After that threshold, signal detection just plummets. The brain starts dropping data.
You literally stop seeing the fish because your brain gets bored of processing the same visual input.
Exactly. The errors skyrocket. So by hardwiring the protocol to a 10-minute sprint, the system guarantees that the counter is only ever operating within the absolute peak window of human cognitive focus.
They sprint for 10 minutes, and then the physical act of climbing down the tower, feeling the cold air, starting the outboard motor, and crossing the river, that acts as a hard neurological reset.
Exactly. By the time they climb the second tower, their attention span has recharged.
It's designing a scientific protocol around the physical reality of the human brain.
Oh.
That's amazing. But let's look at the actual mechanics of the hands. They aren't writing this down on a clipboard, obviously. They use hand-tally clickers, the classic thumb-driven metal counters.
Click, click, click. Every upstream fish gets a click. But the river isn't a one-way street.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Sometimes salmon swim upstream, encounter a turbulent eddy, or get confused, and they swim backward, slipping downstream over the grating.
A negative fish. They are actively undoing the count.
They are. And the counter must account for them to maintain accuracy. So usually a technician will carry a second clicker in their other hand dedicated entirely to downstream fish. Or, if the numbers are low, they just mentally subtract them from the running total before logging the final number in a ledger.
But what happens during a massive push? Like, my son described the conveyor belt at the cannery as just a solid wall of silver. I have seen footage of these rivers where the fish are so densely packed, the water looks like it is literally boiling. You physically cannot move your thumb fast enough to click for every individual fish.
Yeah.
The mechanical clicker would jam.
You definitely can't. And this is where the job transitions from simple counting to a highly trained form of visual volume estimation.
Okay, how does that work?
During those massive pushes, the technician shifts gears. They train their brain to recognize specific densities of fish. So instead of clicking for one fish, they let one click represent a block of 5 fish or 10 fish, or sometimes during the absolute peaks, 20 fish.
So they see a school of 50 fish slide over the grating, and their thumb just goes click, 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 click. 5 tens.
Exactly. It requires a spatial intuition that these counters develop incredibly rapidly. And the cognitive load is even heavier than just volume estimation.
How could it be heavier?
Because they aren't just counting numbers, they are actively separating distinct species by eye in a fraction of a second.
Wait, I assumed every fish in the river was a sockeye.
The vast majority are, yes, but the river is a shared highway. You have king salmon, chum salmon, pink salmon, and sometimes Dolly Varden trout all migrating simultaneously.
Oh, right.
And the biological target, the beg, is entirely species-specific. You cannot count a pink salmon as a sockeye or the entire management model breaks down.
So a 22-year-old on a tower in the freezing rain is looking at a wall of silverfish, estimating them in blocks of 10, and simultaneously spotting a slightly different silhouette and saying, oh, that one is a king salmon, and tracking it separately.
Yes. The reporting points out that during heavy pushes, veterans like Suze Green are sometimes dual-wielding cares. They're clicking blocks of 10 sockeye with their right hand while selectively clicking individual king salmon with their left hand, all based on instantaneous recognition of swimming patterns and body shape over the white grating.
Okay, I'm pushing back again. That sounds like playing a frantic high-speed video game where a single slip of the thumb could accidentally invent 100 phantom salmon or erase 100 real ones. How can the state of Alaska legally and scientifically validate this? Do we actually know that this hand-eye coordination translates to accurate data?
It's a fair question, but the scientific validation studies on this exact question are fascinating, and they unequivocally prove that we can trust the human eye.
Really?
Yes. Researchers have repeatedly tested tower counts by comparing them against the absolute, undeniable data generated by expensive, controlled weirs or sophisticated sonar.
And what is the margin of error for a person dual-wielding clickers in a mosquito swarm?
When run correctly, tower estimates are consistently within plus or minus 6% to 10% of the true absolute population size.
6 to 10%. That is an incredibly tight margin.
It really is. And in some highly controlled comparative studies, the tower counts deviated from the true population by as little as 0.9%.
Wow. Statistically, that is virtually indistinguishable from perfection.
It is. But the truly fascinating part of the research isn't just the overall accuracy, it is the mathematical reason why the accuracy remains so high despite the fact that every single human observer absolutely makes mistakes during their shift.
Right. This is the crux of it. Because I guarantee you, if I'm estimating blocks of 10, I am going to mess up. I will see 9 fish and click 10.
You definitely will. But statistical analysis of the tower data reveals this beautiful mathematical phenomenon. Human observer error in this specific task is overwhelmingly unbiased.
Unbiased error. Explain what that means in a statistical sense.
It means that humans do not consistently make the same direction of mistake. One study tracking individual observer errors showed that their deviations range from negative 5.3% to positive 3.5%.
Okay.
Meaning, during the 8:00 a.m. shift, a counter might be a bit sluggish, maybe miss a few flashes, and accidentally undercount the river by 5%.
That costs the river 5% of its fish.
Exactly. But during the 11:00 a.m. shift, a different counter, or even the same counter who just had a cup of coffee, might be slightly overly aggressive in their volume estimation, and they accidentally overcount by 4%.
So they invent fish.
Right. And because the errors are unbiased and random, over the course of a 24-hour day, across multiple rotating observers, across hundreds of 10-minute sampling periods, the overcounts and the undercounts violently collide and naturally cancel each other out. The aggregate number regressions perfectly toward the true mean.
The law of large numbers completely washes away the human flaws. The mistakes literally correct themselves to reveal an incredibly accurate core number.
It is the statistical elegance of the 10-minute method. And when you combine that proven accuracy with the fact that towers are immensely cheap to operate, require no complex technical support to fix, and most importantly, unlike a weir, they are completely passive and do not physically stress the migrating fish, you understand exactly why this method has survived entirely untouched since 1955.
It's cheap, it's gentle on the ecosystem, and the math proves it is highly accurate. That is a trifecta that is hard to beat. But there is a fatal flaw here, isn't there?
There is always a catch.
We have established that the math works, provided the human eye can actually see the weight grading. But an Alaskan river is at the mercy of the weather. What happens when it rains for 3 days straight? The river floods, the banks erode, and the water turns to brown mud.
The system goes entirely blind. The tower counter stares into the brown water, sees absolutely nothing, and the data stream feeding the managers in Dillingham completely stops. Glare, extreme high water, turbidity, massive wind chop, they all completely degrade the optical pathway.
And that blind spot is exactly what Silicon Valley and modern tech developers are trying to fix right now. We are arriving at the great frontier, the massive debate defining Bristol Bay as of July 2026.
The collision between the 70-year-old analog tradition and the unstoppable force of artificial intelligence.
Exactly. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game, along with regional partners and commercial stakeholders, are actively weighing the large-scale introduction of automated acoustic imaging, drones, and machine learning AI to either supplement the human counters or entirely replace them.
It's a huge shift.
Let's dive deep into the technology of the proposed replacement. Because they aren't just putting a GoPro on a pole, right? What exactly is automated acoustic imaging?
The primary technology being debated is high-frequency sonar, often referred to as ARIS or Didson cameras. Unlike a traditional optical camera that needs light and clear water, an acoustic camera emits rapid pulses of high-frequency sound waves directly into the river. These sound waves bounce off the swim bladders and physical bodies of the salmon passing through the beam, and the returns are translated into a high-resolution, video-like image.
It is essentially medical ultrasound for the river.
Exactly. But the sonar is just the hardware. The truly revolutionary part is the software. Because historically, a human still had to sit in a cabin and watch the sonar tape to count the blips.
Right.
Now they're training deep learning neural networks to watch the sonar feed. The AI is fed thousands of hours of acoustic imagery until it learns to identify not just that an object is moving, but it can analyze the specific tail beat frequency of the object to determine if it is a sockeye salmon, a piece of floating driftwood, or a dolly barden trout.
So the AI watches the ultrasound, counts the fish, and beams the data via satellite straight to the managers. I mean, the argument for this automation seems overwhelmingly powerful from a pure capabilities standpoint.
It really is. The proponents of automation, notably project leaders like Norm Van Vactor, who has extensive experience in the Bristol Bay fishing industry, they point to the undeniable practical benefits. Van Vactor argues that transitioning to AI-driven sonar means the management team could be sitting in a comfortable, climate-controlled cabin rather than forcing young technicians to be out in the bugs and mosquitoes.
And you can't really argue with that. Why subject human beings to that physiological torture if a machine can do it without complaint?
Exactly. And the sonar completely solves the fatal flaw you mentioned earlier. An acoustic camera does not care if the river is choked with brown mud. It does not care if it is a moonless, pitch-black night and the 12-volt car battery died.
Right.
It does not suffer from a 15-minute vigilance decrement. It provides a continuous, unblinking 247 data stream regardless of the environmental conditions. It promises to see where the human tower completely fails.
It is a very, very compelling pitch. Uninterrupted data means tighter management, which theoretically means a more stable fishery. But I have to push back here on behalf of the human counters. Because everything we have discussed about the Tower program isn't just about data collection. It is about a profound human connection to a natural resource.
That's a huge part of it.
When you listen to the first-hand accounts of counters like Sue's Green, they aren't just complaining about the mosquitoes.
No, they express a deep, almost moral sense of purpose in the labor.
Yes, they view themselves as frontline guardians of a species. They are sitting in the freezing rain, suffering the elements because their physical presence ensures the sockeye aren't entirely wiped out by human industry. There's a tangible weight to sitting over a river and physically witnessing millions of lives pass beneath your feet. You lose that entirely if you hand the keys over to a server rack.
You really do. And the debate raises massive socioeconomic and epistemological questions. On the socioeconomic front, these grueling tower jobs are a vital entry point. They provide seasonal employment for local youth and serve as a harsh but necessary rite of passage for future fisheries biologists. Automation threatens to permanently erase those foundational jobs from the ecosystem.
And what about the reliability of the AI? We just spent 10 minutes praising the flawless statistical beauty of unbiased human error. Do we actually know how an algorithm fails?
That's the million-dollar question.
If a neural network misinterprets a massive logjam as a school of 50,000 salmon, it doesn't just make a small mistake. It confidently hallucinates data.
And that leads to the ultimate concern, the epistemological shift. For 70 years, the escapement count has been radically transparent. The data is generated by a human eye looking at a physical animal. Anyone, a commercial fisherman, a tribal leader, a curious tourist, can walk up to the riverbank, stand next to the aluminum tower, and verify with your own eyes that the fish are indeed swimming by.
Right.
The knowledge is democratic and tethered to physical reality.
But if we replace the tower with a sonar beam and a neural network,
you transition from transparent observation to a black box algorithm. The data is no longer generated by a human witnessing nature. It is generated by proprietary code interpreting sound waves.
wow.
The power to define reality shifts completely. It moves from the young technicians standing in the rain on the riverbank to the tech company or the data scientists sitting in a server room thousands of miles away, tweaking the parameters of the algorithm.
It fundamentally changes how we know what we know about the river. It's a profound thought. So let's just step back and synthesize this incredible journey we've been on.
Let's do it.
We started at the absolute peak of human industrial capacity, the Naknek cannery on the 4th of July. We pictured a teenager standing on a wet floor, packing cans at lightning speed, with a 900-pound grizzly bear watching the chaos from the chain-link fence.
Such a vivid image. And we traced the existence of that entire scene backward to a single biological imperative, escapement. The absolute necessity of allowing the perfect number of salmon to survive the commercial nets to prevent both the starvation and the suffocating overpopulation of the pristine spawning beds. We saw how the pursuit of maximum sustained yield drives managers to dynamically throttle a $215 million industry day by day, hour by hour.
And we traveled up the dark rivers to find the source of the data that makes that throttling possible. We didn't find satellites. We found a 70-year-old tradition of young technicians climbing wet aluminum scaffolds, enduring swarms of mosquitoes and clicking hand tallies.
We saw the brilliance of the 10-minute method hacking the human attention span and the statistical elegance of unbiased human error naturally balancing the books.
We saw an unsung, perfectly analog human engine that has quietly and successfully stabilized the largest sockeye fishery on Earth for 7 decades.
Which leaves us at this precarious, fascinating crossroads in 2026. The inevitable collision of the human eye and the AI algorithm.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
The shift from witnessing nature to processing nature.
Exactly.
Hmm?
For 70 years, the health of this wild, massive ecosystem has been completely viscerally legible. The number that runs the billion-dollar economy comes from a person physically watching the lifeblood of the river swim past their feet.
Yeah.
But as we rush toward the undeniable efficiencies of automation, and we prepare to hand this critical biological metric over to a black box neural network, what happens to our inherent relationship with the natural world when nature's most important numbers can only be seen and understood by a machine?